So welcome everybody to our Monday evening podcast.
Welcome all.
Brought to you by the subscribers of the New European newspaper.
Great people.
So today was a massive day for Keir Starmer,
It was a
wasn't
big day of political pageantry because it was his big investment summit.
Yeah.
And perhaps to frame it, there's a little blast from this morning before the summit actually started of Peter Kyle, the science secretary, saying why it matters.
In conversation with Sir Nick Robinson.
In conversation with Sir Nicholas Robinson.
We are all here today alongside businesses from around the world, celebrating the fact that Britain is open for business again, rewarding the fact that we have stability in the planning and running of our economy, the management of our economy, and we are focused on the great potential that we once again have as a country. We have to put in the hard yards as a nation, as an economy and as a government to make sure that we can create the circumstances to fully capitalise on all the potential that's represented here today with £40 trillion worth of global assets assembled here looking at Britain. We are sending a firework up into the night sky around the world to show that Britain is open for business again. That's the point of a big event like this.
Yeah.
And we are determined to capitalise on all of the opportunity it represents.
Shall I tell you what most of them...
all of government doing with one voice.
I'll tell you what most of them will tell you in private, if not in public, is why don't you get closer to the European single market again? Because the biggest barrier we face to investing in Britain is that difficulty of being outside a market, huge market, 450 million people, that we were once in as part of the single market. Wouldn't that be the brave thing to do rather than promising deregulation?
So not for the first time and probably not for the last, Sir Nicholas asking the right question.
Well, firstly, I must say I just loved the analogy of the firework blasting off into the night sky because I immediately thought of the flares going off the decks of the Titanic.
It's an unfortunate metaphor.
But yes, I mean let's discuss the single market in a moment. Many of our listeners, I'm sure, will be nodding vigorously like the Churchill dog at that mention. But it did open the question about, to me, I'll tell you what, it also triggered a question from one of our listeners, which I was going to say for the Sunday Q&A, but I think it's more apposite to get into it now. And it came from Graham Smith this morning at 2 minutes to 9. And he said, do we want large companies investing in our government, especially ethical vacuums such as P&O? When they wield financial power like this, they have control over the country. We elected a Labour government. We didn't elect DP World, which is the conglomerate that owns P&O. And that was from Graham in Queen's Park. Thank you for that, Graham. Do we want this level of control?
It's interesting. First of all, what's been going on? There's been this big jamboree at Guildhall. And lots of captains of industry, as they insist on being called, gathering from around the world to meet pretty much the whole cabinet. Keir Starmer did a keynote. And there's no doubt that its primary purpose was political pageantry, right? Because this is an attempt to get over the terrible start the government has had with the freebies and the winter fuel allowance and the mayhem at number 10. So the first hope will be that this sort of is part of the reset. And in as much as it matters, it was immaculately choreographed. But that's not really the question. The question is, what sort of government is this? Now, it's made clear from the start that it wants to rely on growth, which is almost a meaningless statement. It's now saying that it depends on inward investment, which is also a meaningless question unless you get into the detail of what that means. What are you saying? Because so that there was, let's be fair in as far as we can. Starmer, immediately after his speech, looked a lot more confident and impressive in conversation with the former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, than, do you remember that ghastly Rishi Sunak?
Well, I do, yeah.
Elon Musk.
Although I must say,
interview at Lancaster House.
I did. Well, two things occurred to me on that. One was, is Eric Schmidt the best they can really get? Because
well, that's a good point.
He's last been super relevant 15, 20 years ago, right?
And did you notice that all day the ministers were avoiding the question, was Elon Musk invited?
Exactly. I remember asking Eric Schmidt a question at the Abu Dhabi Media Summit about literally 20 years ago when he was at the peak of his powers.
It's true.
He's a bit of yesterday's man.
So that. But I'm just trying to sort of, steel man their position first. I mean, they have got a very this is true, a very impressive Minister of State for Investment called Poppy Gustafson, who's in the Lords. She's gone to the Lords. She is a genuinely impressive cybersecurity entrepreneur. And if they give her power, she'll be, a formidable force potentially. So, they've already in their 100 days, which has mostly been considered a bit of a failure. They've already got going the National Wealth Fund, GB Energy, and so on, promising big changes to the planning system to encourage building, promising to get onshore wind farms going, promising to make it easier to build on the green belt. And then most interesting to me, oddly enough, was the letter in the Times today, which was almost effusive from people from JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Citibank and UBS, almost effusive and saying, with greater stability, its attractiveness has increased, Britain's attractiveness has increased even further. We are optimistic about the future of the economy and believe it is time to invest in Britain. Now, what I think that's about, because I don't believe that they believe that Britain is suddenly better than it was, on July the 3rd.
Yeah.
I think that this is a dance, and they're trying to make nice with Labour so that Labour will water down what it does in the budget that will hit business.
Yeah.
Which goes back to the question.
So I noticed today one of the lines coming out was Starmer saying that the idea that corporation tax was going to go up to 39% was, quotes, wide of the mark. So, so maybe this is already having an effect. But to Graham's point, is this who we've elected then? Who is the organ grinder and who is the monkey here?
It's first, I mean, lots and lots of important points here. The first thing is that the people who are happy are big business, not small businesses.
Yeah, that's right.
This is all good news for big business. Another thing is his promise of deregulation. Not quite a silver bullet, but of a big element of Labour's offer.
Yeah,
is very difficult to square with social democratic principles. I mean, first of all, deregulation is very easy to promise. Every government promises it, but it's very hard to deliver, and it's also sometimes unwise to deliver. I mean, look at Grenfell.
Matt, this was what struck me and sent a shiver down my spine when Keir Starmer actually flagged up.
He flagged it up
as an example of where deregulation can go wrong. And then he said, and this is the quote, "Where it's stopping us building the homes, data centres, warehouses, roads, train lines, you name it, you mark my words, we'll get rid of it." Right.
He said he also said, which is just nonsense, the key test of regulation is, of course, growth. It's not. The regulation is there to prevent harms from whatever it is, whether it's public service practice or business practice or whatever, And regulation is often infuriating, and it is often overbearing.
Yeah.
But it's rarely arbitrary. This is the kind of lazy use of the words red tape.
Yeah.
What is regulation? It reflects it's like common law. It generally reflects the history of whatever service or business sector is in question. And it reflects bad experiences that have led to regulations being imposed over the years. Now, as circumstances change, as technology changes, as the labour market changes, as the challenges change, of course you want to keep looking at regulation. But simply talking about deregulation as a kind of policy is odd, full stop, and especially odd for a Labour government, because a lot of what a Labour government is supposed to do will involve measures I mean, what are they going to when they are dealing with the absolutely disgraceful state of the water supply?
Yes.
What are they going? Is deregulation the answer there?
Well, quite clearly not.
Plainly not.
Do you remember that the conversation we had? We had a podcast on the back of the inquiry into Grenfell,
right?
And I mentioned I think he was the president of the Royal Institution of British Architects, the Royal Institute of British Architects, who had said that when he was a young architect, there was literally a statute book on his desk which would tell you how you had to build a staircase.
Yeah.
Right. And he said that's all gone, and that was all ripped up by George Osborne and David Cameron. But it was that ripping up of regulation that led with a devastating inevitability to what we saw at Grenfell, because the reality is, you remove regulation. You can describe it as removing obstacles to a business's success.
Sometimes it is,
or you can describe it as facilitating a business's greed.
Yeah,
and that
often it's both.
And I'm afraid that businesses have a tendency towards optimizing their returns.
Absolutely, and I mean, what I do find troubling about all this is the whiff of what I thought we'd lost, which is cakeism. Boris Johnson, love of having his cake and eating it.
Yeah.
This seems to perfectly dramatise it in a way. I mean, look, you mentioned DP World. Look what happened and almost actually overshadowed the summit. I mean, they got away by the skin of their teeth. But what happened? Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary, said that DP World, which owns P&O, was a rogue operator, and she personally would boycott it, wanted the government to have nothing to do with it. They threatened to pull out of the DP World, threatened to pull out of the summit and cancel a planned £1 billion investment in their London Gateway port. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, and Starmer threw Louise Haigh under the bendy bus.
Under the ferry.
Under the ferry with absolutely no compunction, and DP World turned up. So that was a pretty clear statement of where they stand on that. And the way they attempted to square the circle as well, DP World had got into terrible trouble in 2022 by firing 800 staff without notice. But they're now on board with all our nice measures. Yeah. And, so to carry on with the cakeism thing, not long ago, the government, specifically Angela Rayner, unveiled the Employment Rights Bill, which includes a huge suite of, new regulations, protections against unfair dismissal. It changes the way that probationary periods work, entitlement to statutory sick pay, parental leave rights, 0 or low hour contracts, fire and rehire practices. Now, most of these strike me as highly desirable, if not all. But I'm also puzzled by the repeated claim during the day that there was absolutely nothing in there that would put off businesses or investors. And cakeism is a terrible, trying to do two contradictory things at once. Is a really bad. I think we've tested that one to destruction under Johnson.
I mean, the biggest cakeism irony that leapt off the page to me when I was reading the sort of the news. I mean, obviously it was orchestrated, and you get these dropping. Oh, so and so is investing
Stansted's
$1 billion,
getting $1 billion,
blah blah blah.
Yeah,
but the one that I nearly fell off my chair when I saw was Macquarie, right? The Australian merchant bank saying we're going to invest 20 billion quid in, I think it's EV charging points in road shafts that they own, right? Now, Macquarie are the people who absolutely ransacked Thames Water, right? When they owned Thames Water. They say, and I'll say it so that they don't have to write in and say it, they say they had the biggest investment program in Thames Water's history, etc., etc. But they also took out £2.8 billion in dividends. They saw debt go from 3.4 billion to 10.8 billion pounds in Thames Water in the 11 years that they owned it. They left it in an absolute financially crippled, and they left literally our rivers and chalk streams and all of that flowing with sewage. Now, these people, this is to Graham's question, I think, which is, it's more than just how cozy do we have to be with these people. It's what level, who is actually controlling the country. Now, Macquarie have had ownership stakes in Glasgow Airport, Aberdeen Airport, Southampton Airport, Cadent, the gas pipe supplier network. They run Southern Water now, incredibly, that having done what they did to Thames Water,
amazing,
they now run Southern Water. So when Macquarie come to call on Keir Starmer, and he says clean up the water, as I hope Keir Starmer will insist on when Fergal Sharkey's magnificent march takes place at the end of this month, and everybody finally realises that we've been absolutely pillaged by these people, and there's got to be some redress. I mean, obviously, Macquarie have no longer anything to do with Thames Water because they got out just before literally before the shit hit the fan, right? But when he does, and then that's a tricky conversation for a Prime Minister to a company where he's just bent over backwards to get 20 billion quid's worth of EV chargers in the Roadchef network. So I understand the need for private companies to see Britain as a great place for investment. But this seems to me to be far too one-sided, and especially when you're dealing with companies who've got an objective history of coming in, taking the piss, taking their billions of pounds worth of dividends and then leaving a mess behind them.
I agree with absolutely all of that. And I also wonder, in addition to the sort of ethical questions, how likely all of this is to work. So what do investors look for? They look, first of all, for stability. And this was one of the reasons why Rishi Sunak cancelling HS2 and then mucking about the net zero targets was treated with such scorn by the outside world, because it was teenage behaviour by supposedly grown-up government. So there's that. It's also true that they look for a place where the rule of law operates, which, no thanks to Johnson and others, it just about still does in this country. Yeah. But another thing that is absolutely key is infrastructure. Now, there's been an announcement on Stansted today, but I think you'd be pushing it if you claim that the infrastructure in this country is in tip-top condition. And we were in Berlin last week, and it's a shock, isn't it, to see a city where the infrastructure is so much
stuff functions and works.
so much better. And now there's an old saying that governments invest billions and the private sector will invest trillions. Right now, that may not be literally true, but the question, I think one of the big questions coming up in the budget is Rachel Reeves going to relax her fiscal rules sufficiently to borrow to build? Right? Because if she doesn't, to be honest with you, most of this is
pie in the sky.
Well, some of it will come about, but actually, the just sort of a series of announcements and Elton John singing, which apparently he is. It's a new
old Elton.
New version of Candle in the Wind about Keir Starmer and the shortest Labour government in history. No, it won't be that. But unless you actually do things like that, which are, again, to come back to our, hymn number 107, unless you are audacious, none of this will happen. And I think this is, to come back to Graham's question and to yours, which is who holds the whip hand here? Right? Is Labour's answer really just a sort of soft version of Trussism, which is growth funded by what big business wants? Now that, whatever that is, it's not Labour.
Well, let's move on a little bit to Sir Nick Robbo's very, very pertinent point.
Very much so, yeah.
Because the other quote that Keir Starmer said, which made me nearly spit my cornflakes out this morning, was that he wanted quotes, an open, outward-looking trading nation. Right?
Yes.
He wanted to restore Britain's reputation as an open, outward-looking trading nation.
We know a song about that, don't we?
Well, I mean, honestly, mate. I mean, there is an elephant in the room here, which is
it's hilarious.
I mean, the absolute fix this in a wanna answer to that challenge is to, with absolute haste, go and start building a freedom of movement, a youth mobility, a recalibration of our relationship with the European Union that is based on a pathway to rejoin that institution, or the single market at a minimum.
Yes. The irony, of course, is that one of the selling points of Brexit was that it was going to lead sort of axiomatically to a bonfire of red tape, as the Tories wanted.
Yeah.
And it's led to the opposite, which is that, businesses find themselves in this country now tangled up in actually completely irritating and unnecessary red tape. So if you really want to deregulate, get back into the single market.
But the thing is that, again, leaving the single market has not made us stronger in any way. It's made us weaker. Well, it's bleedingly obvious that people want to do business with the largest community of trading nations on the planet, and not the little island to the left.
Of course. And that's really what today was all about, which was, if you dug beneath the surface, it was the government saying, we know that you think we've gone mad because of Brexit, but if you are nice to us, we will give you a budget that you'll really like. And then please, pretty please, can you give us the investment that will deliver the growth that will help us with public services that will get us re-elected? Now, there's a lot of ifs in there. We've all seen these summits, right? Credit to the spin doctors and people around it. They've managed to create a lot of hoopla around what is essentially, a large-scale talking shop, right, with a few nice announcements and a fancy dinner at the end. What does it amount to? Not really that much. Now, if Labour strategists are listening into this, and if you are, hello, will scream at their phones or their devices and say, it amounts to a lot. Look at all these announcements we've made. But the real question is, what does this government stand for? Where is it heading? And is it prepared to make difficult decisions which aren't just difficult decisions at the expense of ordinary people? And also that involve small businesses as well as big businesses, because I didn't hear a whole lot today that's going to help, tech startups, for example, which allegedly are supposed to be at the heart of what this government intends. Yeah. And a lot of the things that are being given preferential treatment under this green paper for industrial strategy don't catch the little tech startups that actually are going to be the Googles and the equivalent of Amazon and so on of the future.
Yeah, if the plan is to recreate some sort of Silicon Valley here in the UK, that's where you've got to start.
Biotech, health tech, and that's where, and you want to be encouraging the garage outfits. Jeff Bezos started Amazon selling books from a garage, right? Yeah. There are the equivalent of that in the biotech sector now all over the UK, but a lot of them will not be in any way benefited by what we had heard today. This is, so to speak, a plan for the CBI rather than for the IoT, if that makes any sense.
The biggest takeaway for me from today is, and I'm glad that there are still people out there who want to invest, providing they want to invest for the right reasons. But the biggest takeaway is that when the argument was that we wanted to regain our sovereignty, right? Yes. Which was always a total misnomer, because in any transaction with anybody, you are pooling sovereignty.
Anything.
Everything, in anything, any arrangement, any contract,
unless you are literally
pooling sovereignty.
Unless you have sort of Keynesian self-sufficiency, where you
unless you're North Korea,
weave your own yogurt, and
that's right, and you can live in perfect poverty, but have your own absolute sovereignty.
Own your own.
North Korea is probably and Bhutan are probably the only two examples of that on the planet. So we had pooled our sovereignty with the European Union. Now we are choosing to pool our sovereignty with international conglomerates.
Yes, that's a good way of looking at it.
And we are much the weaker for it. I'm not naive enough to think that multinational conglomerates have never held influence. Of course they have. But when you have to deal with the entity, the government, the uber national governmental structure like the European Union, where you have all these regulations, and that is the life. There's no flex. You're an international corporation going into that. You know what the rules are. It's much less clear now what the rules are here.
Well, all of the people that signed that letter to the Times, every single institution they represent, are the definition of Don Juan. They meant it when they said it, right?
Yeah,
I mean, they operate by design, not by evil, but by design, by caprice,
of course,
right? If they don't like if they change their mind in a year, they'll just stop.
Yeah.
And so what I worry about it was put to me by a tech person today who was not happy about the way things had gone, that although there are people in this government that have had jobs outside government, there's very little accrued business knowledge. And there's a sort of naivety, and people get very excited when they first come into contact with the might of big banks, big business. BlackRock folk. There's Larry Fink. I saw Rachel Reeves shaking hands with Larry Fink, and Angela Rayner squiring around. You sort of thought, this is big. This must feel big after you've been in opposition.
Yeah, suddenly
you're 14 years. Suddenly you're talking to these global titans.
And they're promising you all sorts of great things.
And it's a very seductive thing. But part of government is knowing when to, check the silver, know?
I mean, probably the most economically literate Prime Minister we've had in the last 25 years would be Gordon Brown.
By a mile.
Now, could you imagine Gordon Brown saying any of the things in this context to these people like Macquarie?
No, I mean...
It wouldn't happen.
Not with such... I mean, I can imagine him holding an investment summit.
Yeah.
Indeed, he did hold equivalent events.
But not with this sense of kind of joyous naivety about...
Well, as if the Wizard of Oz has arrived, or Santa, more perhaps.
Exactly. As if you weren't dealing, let's be frank, as if you weren't dealing with a bunch of people who would eat your corpse if you gave them a chance to. Because that's what these people would do.
Well, it's called business for a reason, right? They're not, and I do think that people of Starmer's background, let's put it no further than that, do buy all this corporate social responsibility bullshit at face value, right? And what you have to ask is why are all these businesses pretending to be eco-friendly and diverse and painting murals in Malawi and they're not doing it because they're good. They're doing it because it impresses the media and it gets politicians off their back a bit. Right?
Yeah.
That's why they do it.
They do it because it's good for business. That's their business.
End of.
Not for the country.
Right? It's
good for their business.
It's not that business was suddenly afflicted by this great, we must do penance, No, I mean, CSR is a racket.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, I have greater respect for straightforward cutthroat capitalists than these sort of pseudo-green, sustainable investment nonsense talkers.
You know what I saw?
Greenwashing away,
Yeah. I read in, when we were in Berlin, I read about the redevelopment of Berlin after reunification. And because Berlin was in terrible shape,
course,
obviously. I mean, Potsdamer Platz was an absolute wasteland, and it's now. And I must do some more digging in this before I say this with huge confidence. but Mercedes-Benz bought huge swathes of land in Potsdamer Platz and in all over, as quotes a statement of belief in Berlin. But it was a German company really throwing down money to say, right, Berlin is going to be great again. Yeah. Okay. And I thought that seemed to me to be a much more equitable and I don't want to use the word benevolent, because again, I do believe everything is about business, but a long-term, mutually
useful for a start.
A venture of mutual interest, where you could see it's important that Germany succeeds for Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes-Benz saying, "Oh, we're going to place a bet that we believe will pay dividends in the future, but we'll all win." That's not the sense I've got from this. This seemed like an invitation to put your money in on the blackjack table and then walk away when you've got a big stack of chips in front of you, because that's what we've seen from these exact same companies in the past.
I mean, most of the companies that were significant have been involved in all sorts in the last 10 years, and a lot of them were involved in the crash.
Yeah.
And I don't believe they've changed fundamentally. And I know they haven't changed fundamentally. Yeah. And all I'm saying, there may be people out there saying, "Oh, you're not giving Labour a chance. He's put this together in just over 100 days. What would you do?" And my answer to that is, I would exercise a lot more, what's the word? Due diligence.
Yeah.
There was no sign of due diligence in this. This was just a kind of, the Tories were obviously rubbish, so, and this is the logical, the illogical jump. We must be great, and therefore, if we deal with business, it's going to be great. Well, that is not a logical,
I'm
sequence
afraid
of thinking.
That I think they've created a few problems that will come back to.
I agree.
To haunt them quite soon. Well, listen, I'll tell you what. Let's
have a break.
Let's have a quick break, and then we're going to come back about a place where there's no question they really do need some investment.
Yeah.
So, Matt, welcome back, everybody. I read this morning in The Guardian about the absolute crisis that local authorities are facing.
Yeah, you drew my attention to the story, and it was quite a shocking read, actually.
And it's a crisis that's been building over 10 years in local authority funding.
Really, longer.
I mean, just to put it in some context, since 2010, from 2010 to 2021, the amount of funding in real terms that local authorities have got, and this is to pay for lots of education stuff, lots of social care for children, social care for elderly people, a whole swathe of absolutely vital services.
Actually, a huge section of what people call public services.
Exactly. It's down by 1/3 in real terms. And this has all been driven by, the austerity, the clampdown. And not only are they skint now, but it's getting worse and worse.
Worse.
As the purse strings are getting drawn tighter and tighter, they're facing a £6 billion shortfall.
At least.
By 26-27.
So there's which is huge money for services that have already been cut to the bone.
And the real terms stuff for this, the real terms consequence of this is that the weakest and the most vulnerable in our society are absolutely getting shafted.
And so you had the Children's Commissioner, who's a very good and excellent person, Dame Rachel D'Souza, saying that children were in line to bear the brunt of this.
Well, she said, a quote that I found moving in the sense that for it to have to be said seems shameful. And the quote was, "Children must not pay the price for balancing budgets."
And, let's not forget that children were on the receiving end, paid a heavy price for the pandemic. And now their services are run down, libraries are closing, childcare provision is desperate, child protection is in desperate need.
Yeah.
Transport for disabled children is cut to the bone.
Period poverty.
Everything. You just go down the list of things that kids need, and this is a crisis. About 50% of local government spending comes from Whitehall comes from the centre.
Yeah.
And you add to that, so there have been huge cuts in that. Add to that the council tax bands are defined by 1991 valuations.
Amazing.
So, is it any surprise that they've faced these sort of problems? And you add to that, they only get to keep a proportion of the business rates they charge.
Yeah.
Now, this is going back to this is a different kind of investment, but this is a clear and present danger to the social fabric because we talk a lot, and rightly so, about the NHS. But most of what we mean by the public space, the public sphere, is actually sorted at local level.
Yeah.
And yet it is funded at central level, or at least half of it. And so there's this great mismatch because a lot of rubbish is talked. There's a sort of series of bromides about, we're going to make, every government promises to make decision-making more devolved, to give more authority to local decision makers, whether it's mayors or unitary authorities or county councils or district councils or whatever. But very rarely do they allow them much leeway in raising money or give them more money.
Yeah.
And so the net effect is, and I think this is really important in understanding why there is so much disillusionment with politics, so much dejection, is that the things that actually people worry about, that we've already talked about children's services, but rubbish collection, recycling, housing, planning applications, all these things are done at local level.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a system that is radically centralized. We also have, and this is something we've talked about on the podcast before, the total hollowing out of the local media.
Yeah.
So there is really
this is something I'm glad you brought this up.
I mean, I know you feel strongly, as do I.
I mean, it's so important, but it's gone.
It's gone.
Well, let me caveat that slightly by saying that there are remnants.
There are holdouts, and there
are a few startups,
innovations.
There's like a company called Mill Media, which are launching local journalism sites up and down the country in major cities. But if you compare, for instance, when we both got into journalism, I started out as a trainee reporter on the Bootle Times and the Formby Times. And my job was to attend council meetings, maybe 3 or 4 nights a week.
Yep.
Magistrates' court a lot. One of the most popular stories was, 57 train dodgers inside this week's Southport Visitor, But I would cover council meetings and sit there and afterwards go and speak to councillors about why are you making this decision, or Mrs. Jones from down the road is furious about this. What's your case?
Real politics.
And we would also dig into local iniquities where things had clearly gone wrong, and we would challenge the council publicly. And I can promise you that councillors knew who we were and knew we were on their case. And I can promise you now, today, there is probably not a single councillor in the country who gives a damn about who the local reporter is, and couldn't care tuppence.
I mean,
that is potentially catastrophic.
It is and depressing to reflect that the only two forces now that really exercise any impact upon what you were describing are Facebook and WhatsApp.
Yeah, right.
So
right.
There are some and by the way, it's marginal.
Marginal.
There are Facebook groups.
Yeah,
and there are big WhatsApp groups that accrue information. Yeah. But this is not local democracy. This is.
It's also
it's a sticking plaster, to use one of Keir Starmer's favourite metaphors.
I mean, it's also. I mean, maybe there's something circular in this conversation in that it's also a consequence of media's obsession with graduates and graduate trainees.
Oh, definitely.
And the fact that people are now put through journalism school, which is pretty much it's an innovation of the last 20 years, really.
Very recent.
And the focus isn't about joining small local newspapers and working your way up. It's about getting onto a national title of some sort or a digital title of some sort. and really the idea that people no longer are trained in council
They're not.
work, about how to understand a committee, about the way local government works and how to challenge it. It's really, really important that people, readers, listeners to this podcast, understand that they're now vulnerable because there's no one checking these people's accounts anymore.
Look, I mean, with honourable exceptions, right? The media is London.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there have been sort of performative moves of offices, BBC offices to Cardiff, you know, Channel 4 trying to move to Leeds and all. But the truth is that they're really there as sort of outposts of London, not as checking up on what's going on there. And so we are more, in terms of our democracy, the structure of our democracy, at precisely the moment when we need to become more decentralized, more attentive to the differences between different communities, how they're faring, why is it that this part of the country, I mean, you know, we hear endlessly about levelling up, right? It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything because there aren't people there monitoring it, scrutinizing it. You know, the democratic role of the media in that respect is now nugatory. It doesn't really happen.
Yeah.
And I think that this is I heard Tim Davie on the Director General of the BBC on the radio this morning talking about how important it was to keep international broadcasting services going, and I completely agree with that. But I also think that, you know, it would be great if even more of the license fee or whatever succeeds it was devoted to local journalism.
Well, the BBC, to be fair,
it's not.
They put this local democracy reporter scheme together. I think people correct me. I think there's about 150 local democracy reporters around the country, and they're placed in the main. They're placed in large existing legacy, what you call legacy media organisations. And they do brilliant work. You know, I know that they do great work because I used to employ a few of them when I worked in Norfolk at a newspaper group. But it is a drop in the ocean. I mean, I'm making this off the top of my head, but it's with some knowledge. And I would say, I reckon there's probably about 10% of the local newspaper journalists working now in the country than there were when I got into journalism, say, you know, what are we talking about, 40 years ago, 38 years ago. I reckon it's probably 10% of what they used to be.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So, folks, work it out how much scrutiny there's going on. Not much.
This is not bleeding heart talk. This is social contract, social cohesion talk.
Yeah.
You know, it's endless talk about levelling up, left behinds, you know, the red wall. You know, why do you think bits of the country feel left behind?
Yeah.
You know, it is actually achingly simple.
Yeah. And
yet there is almost no, as far as I can tell, no real political will. No. I mean, everyone makes the right noises, and every politician you've ever met or heard says they're in favour of devolution. But when you ask, well, what does that actually mean in practice to the voter living in a deprived area of an area that's not well served by local media or by its, you know, and has very little local money? There's a sort of shrug and difficult decisions, you know.
Yeah. Well, this is a topic that we will, I mean, it's not a popular topic because I don't know why people should be fascinated by it, but it's not a topic that fills our newspaper. It's not glamorous at all.
It's not glamorous, and it doesn't have what it lacks. And this is a great sort of indictment of politics and media, is that politics has increasingly become a branch of the entertainment industry, and what local coverage doesn't have is the big name soap opera.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't have Morgan McSweeney versus Sue Gray, or I don't know what. No. You know,
maybe the last time it was Derek Hatton in Liverpool.
Yes,
you know.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
But you know, one of Thatcher. I mean, this goes back, but this has history. I mean, one of the things that Thatcher wanted to do, as you know, and did with the GLC and in Liverpool and many other places, was to squash local government.
Yeah.
I mean, this has been 40 years in the making.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Before we go, we must mark the passing of Alex Salmond.
Yeah, but I think
let's do it in a balanced way, shall we?
In a spirit of truth.
Well, I mean, we both agreed, and with some trepidation perhaps, because it's never nice saying nasty things about people who have just died. But there are a few nasty things to say about Alex Salmond, besides
there are.
the laudatory things that have been said.
Well, I mean, everyone knows that he was, the force that kind of energised the SNP, and he was First Minister from 2007 to 2014, and he almost won the independence referendum in 2014, but he lost it. But he also he personified that sleazy, divisive side of the SNP.
Yeah,
he led a breakaway party. SNP suffered a rout in the 2024 general election. It went from 48 seats to 9. Now he was no longer leader, but the rot had already set in. And I think the other thing to say is that, and I think big props to our colleague Marie Leconte, who writes, if people don't know, another reason to subscribe to the New European is writes the wonderful dilettante column on the back page of the New European. And Marie, I think, quite boldly posted on X on Saturday night after Salmond died the following. She said, "Personally, I'm really enjoying all the men posting nice things about a man who faced several credible accusations of sexual misconduct from multiple women. I'll also really enjoy it when these men in 3 to 5 months will see something happen and go, why don't more women go into politics? Or maybe they'll wonder why the culture is so toxic in British politics. Truly, it's anyone's guess." And I thought that was bold and impressive.
Well, and I agree completely. And it's like my favourite quote from the play Julius Caesar, that the good men do is often interred with their bones, but the evil lives on after them.
Yes, very true.
It's not often true, but it should be marked, because to deny that side of Alex Salmond's personality and to deny that behaviour. I mean, he was found not proven in a Scottish court, but that
on one count, everything else was. But I mean, that says a lot. Yeah, go on.
But the threshold for guilt in a court does not mean that he was not a sleazy person.
And indeed, the defence, rather ironically, depended on this being a misunderstanding of his admittedly creepy and touchy-feely approach to women.
And I think, to Marie's point, we do see, and we saw it with Hugh Edwards, we see a rush of men coming out to defend
the powerful,
and also the
friends.
People they've known and had dinner with and had a laugh with and have always found great. But you weren't the people whose arse felt his hand unwelcomely.
Look, here's a quickly, it's sort of an anecdote. When I was the editor of The Spectator, I was in my office one day and I was doing some paperwork and was absorbed by it, and I looked up, and sitting on the sofa with no introduction and hadn't made any noise coming in was Alex Salmond. And there was a rather impressive presumption and sort of tradecraft in the fact that he'd just got into my office with no one noticing and me not hearing, and there he was sitting, and he engaged me in conversation for an hour. So I came away thinking, this is from that exchange alone, this is someone of silken ability, if you like, right? Yeah. But that's bullshit, to be honest. That's just performance. That's the performance of politics.
Yeah.
What really matters, or at least is very important, is how the powerful treat those who have less power than them.
Right.
And I think we know the answer in Alex Salmond's case.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, no more needs to be said.
And
I don't enjoy picking out the flaws, especially
but you know
in
what?
the immediate aftermath. But
I agree, but the old De mortuis nil nisi bonum, only of the dead, only the only good should be spoken.
Yeah.
But actually, it's a ridiculous principle to apply to someone who's been in public life.
Yeah.
I mean, no one, when Kissinger died, no one...
Well, that's true, yeah.
No one held back then, and rightly so, So I don't think... let's just say, there is a bit of a pattern forming at the moment in Me Too cases, posthumously or not, of men of a certain kind rushing to say, what a lovely bloke, what a diamond geezer.
Yeah.
And I think it's good for us all just to sort of, before doing that, think, hang on a minute, how does saying that in public affect those who were
on the receiving
end of his
worse behaviour,
bad use of power, and their inability to do much about it.
Well said. All right, thank you. Enough. Send in your thoughts, your feedback, your questions to the 2Matts at tnepublishing.com. That's the number 2, MATTS, at tnepublishing.com. Don't forget to subscribe. If you like this podcast, you will love The New European, and you can subscribe from just £1 a week and you'll get our free Bollocks to Brexit passport cover. Hooray! You go to theneweuropean.co.uk/2Matts. That's the number 2, MATTS. There's a link in the show notes. Thanks as ever to our production team, led this week by Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. And until Friday,
have a great week.
Have a fantastic week.
Bye for now.